Good afternoon and welcome to the MIT Alumni Career Lunch and Learn webinar series. My name is Ellen Stahl and I head up the Alumni Career Programs at the Alumni Association and will serve as host and moderator for today's workshop. Our webinar is being broadcast live and we'll be collecting questions from you throughout the presentation. Please type your questions in the chat box on the lower right side of the WebEx window. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view online in 1 week on our YouTube channel, accessible on the alumni website. A few technical notes. We're thrilled so many people are on our WebEx audience today, and due to the large size of the audience, you are all muted, which means you can only ask questions via the chat box or Q&A box on the right side of your screen. Our presentation today is Troubleshoot Your Career the MIT Way. This webinar is scheduled from 12 to 1. We will hear from our presenter for about 35 minutes or so. I'll be collecting questions throughout the presentation for the official Q&A portion of the program at the end of the presentation. So please type your questions in the chat box at any time during the webinar. You don't need to wait and to ask your questions until the very end. Before we get started, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. We are grateful and fortunate to have returning to our webinar series, Ann Guo. Ann received her bachelor's in Course 6 in 1998 and an MEnG in 99, and a PhD from UMass Amherst in computer science in 2006. Ann is a career and executive coach who specializes in helping high achievers blast through career roadblocks and reach a sustained state of flow. No stranger to career transitions herself, she has gone through artificial intelligence research, software product management, entrepreneurship, and executive recruiting to arrive at her current profession as coach. In addition to coaching clients one-on-one, she is the founder of 2 career-related startups. With her newest startup, Passion Analytics, she is developing an automated online career coach that integrates deep career expertise with advanced analytics in order to help people at scale. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's a real pleasure to have your expertise again for this program. Ann, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Ellen. I'm very excited to be here today. So first, for some context on my career, I spent most of my 20s in grad school getting a PhD in AI. Definitely didn't see a career as a coach coming in my future at the time. And right out of school, I found a startup which went nowhere. Then in September 2008, I got my first job as a software product manager. Less than 2 months later, I was laid off in the aftermath of the market crash. I was 8 months pregnant at the time, starting my career at the beginning of a deep recession with a new baby and $120,000 in student loan debt. Fast forward, I achieved financial independence in my late 30s. I'm doing what I love every day as a career coach, even though I don't have to work. I'm on my second startup now, building an automated coach, which might actually use some of the AI I learned from back in the day. My career has come full circle. So today, I'll share a framework that you can use to debug and improve your own career. Aside from many of the lessons I learned personally, it's a culmination of years of work digesting social science literature, personal development books, as well as my experience coaching clients one-on-one. So first, let's take a quick look at the phrase, pursue your passion. The Google Ngram viewer tells us the popularity of a particular phrase in books through time. So here, I plot the frequency of occurrence over the last 100 or so years. And as you can see, the phrase was hardly used until the 60s, and then really went up in popularity starting mid-90s. This means you've been hearing the phrase, pursue your passion, with increasing frenzy in the last 20 years. I tried a number of other phrases in the same genre and found follow your dreams is even more popular and more historical. It appears on the scene around 1910, then all but disappeared during the Great Depression, which makes sense, made a small resurgence during World War II, then rocketed up in popularity from the mid-1980s on. So here are 2 contrasting popular depictions of career we're exposed to. On one hand, we have Steve Jobs representing passion and achievement. On the other hand, we have Peter Gibbons from the movie Office Space, representing drudgery of corporate America. So both of these pictures may resonate with us in some ways, and we're stuck in the middle feeling confused. As a career coach, here are some of the common questions I hear. First, I'm good at what I do, but I sometimes wonder, is this it? Is this all there is? 2, I'm struggling with filling the blank, grad school, my startup, making a documentary filmmaker. Should I try harder when I've been foolhardy by sticking to it? People say never give up your dream. Really never? Even if I'm stuck at it and can't make a living? 3, I don't love my job. I get by and it pays okay. What should I do? Just accept it because the job is a job at the end of the day? Should I buckle down and make it better? Should I move on? 4, if I leave, how big of a change do I want to make? New job, new industry, new career? Pursue my crazy childhood dream of becoming a circus performer? And 5, should I pursue my passion or settle for something sensible? Is passion overrated? My grandpa put his nose to the grindstone and worked on the farm. He's really happy. Why can't I be like that? Today, I'll show you a framework that helps you get to the bottom of these hairy questions. And here's an overview of the rest of the talk. First, I'll introduce the career energy framework. And then I'll show you how to troubleshoot your career with it. And finally, we'll revisit the framework and do a deeper dive on 2 parts that tend to trip people up. So this next slide is the crux of the talk. This framework thinks about career in terms of how energetic you feel on a day-to-day basis. At any given time, you can feel super positive and high energy or super negative and low energy. So let's start with the first factor of career energy, and that's competence. When you feel competent at your job, you feel a sense of accomplishment and mastery as you move through your day. You generally experience an energy boost. Now, on the contrary, when you have an important deadline looming and you're stuck, you probably start stressing out about letting people down, or what your boss might say, or even getting fired from your job. It can be really stressful. In the worst case, you can even get an anxiety attack. So feeling incompetent can be a huge energy drain, noted here by this big negative bar in the negative direction. Now, what I have here is the typical range for the effect of competence on your energy level. So these are ranges. The second factor is interest. You might be good at, say, accounting, but if every day all you dream about is making documentary films, you might be bored at your job and, you know, looking at the clock up for lunch around 10 a.m. So boredom feels bad, but not as bad as an anxiety attack. This is why the bar that signifies energy drain here is not as large compared to what we have under competence. When we're inherently interested in our task, we may feel positive and engaged. Even a sense of flow where time passes by without us noticing, you know, we may even forget to eat and sleep. The next factor is purpose, or how meaningful you feel your job is. The sense of purpose is very personal. You know, even doing the same task, some people can feel a sense of purpose and others, you know, don't. This can be illustrated by the bricklayer's parable. So one day you come upon 3 bricklayers busy at work, and you ask each of them what they're doing. The first bricklayer answers, "I'm laying bricks." The second one says, "I'm building a church." And the third one wipes the sweat from his brow, pauses, and says with reverence, "I'm building the house of God." The third bricklayer has found his calling and experienced a deep sense of meaning in what he does. And then, of course, there's this guy. So having a sense of purpose at our work can give us an energy boost. Without it, though, we may feel a little empty and wonder what's the point, even when things are going well on the surface. Over time, we may have a quarter-life crisis or midlife crisis. In general, though, on a day-to-day basis, the sense of emptiness is usually in the background and not too bothersome, and usually not as bad as boredom, and certainly not as bad as the anxiety attack we can get if we have really low competence at our job. So now personality is next. How well your job matches your personality can affect how energetic we feel on a day-to-day basis. If you're an introvert, if you're forced to make cold calls all day, you're probably miserable at your job. Now, the key question to ask here is, do you feel like yourself at work? And one good way to figure out how well your personality fit your job is through this quick thought experiment. So, first, picture your best friend. Okay, so now picture your best friend as a fly on the wall where you work. Would she or he be surprised by how you behave? Now take a second to ponder on that. If you start laughing or cringing, then probably you act that way at work as a result of your coping mechanism rather than who you really are. So when your job matches your personality well, you feel at ease and you get a small energy boost. But however, when your job conflicts with your personality, you may feel really angry and frustrated, and that's why there's a much bigger negative drain. And then last not least, we have needs. It's another important factor that affects our career energy. It acts a little differently than the other 4 factors in that it's a total liability. It only has negative downside, the potential to drain you, but no positive upside. And let me show you what I mean. So if you're listening to this talk right now, chances are you don't have a splitting headache, unless I'm giving you one, I guess. But chances are you're not jumping up and down celebrating either, right? That's about the fact that you're headache-free. So when our needs are met, we tend to take them for granted and not experience any positivity. A work-related example would be our need for natural light. Say you have an office with a window, and you may not think much about it, but the day you get moved to an interior office, windowless office, that's the day you start feeling miserable. So now you might be wondering, are the possible ranges or relative size of these bars absolute? Now, even though I'm displaying these bars with certain height in a quantitative way, they're really more qualitative in nature and should be thought of as general guidelines. And this could differ from person to person by somewhat. It's a compilation of my experience coaching hundreds of people. It captures my intuition as a coach as more of an art than a science, which is my way of saying it's a little hand-wavy. So to illustrate the career energy framework, let's run through some simple examples. And you may even recognize yourself in some of them. So here first we have the cog in the machine. So this is when a person is highly competent at their job, but is bored, has no sense of purpose, doesn't fit their personality great, and their needs for self-expression, lots of other things are not being met. And so now second, we have the burned out social worker. Now this person has a high sense of purpose, but over time, as they bang their heads against a wall due to bureaucratic red tape, they get overwhelmed and feel like nothing they do will ever make a difference, and their sense of competence as a result is severely challenged. Right? So their interest might dwindle over time as well because they're forced to take on more and more administrative tasks due to the lack of resource, at the nonprofit. And finally, their need for financial security is not met due to low pay, and also the thankless nature of their job also leaves their need for recognition unfulfilled. And now we have the workaholic startup founder with high interest and purpose, but challenged sense of competence, and basically need for sleep are not met, or his need for financial security. Now, I want to stress that this framework is relevant not only for your career, as you can see here, but for other projects as well. So, for example, raising a baby. While your sense of purpose is high because you love your newborn, unless you really enjoy playing peekaboo all day or getting no sleep at night, you might get bored, tired, and feel really incompetent when the baby is crying. You have no idea what to do to make it stop. So if you're contemplating having kids, ideally you want to have some stuff going on in your life that help you offset that energy drain in those first few years. In reality, though, this tends to be the time when our career is ramping up. So having two sources of potential energy drain going on concurrently can be really overwhelming. So hopefully now you have a sense of the career energy framework that we covered. And next, I'll show you how to use it to troubleshoot your own career. So first, I encourage you to take out a pen and piece of paper and draw the energy profile of your current career situation. If you're in between jobs, then you can just sketch out your last job. If you're a student, you can sketch out, your current career as a student and how these 5 bars and where they are. So take a stab at it, and we'll resume in 30 seconds. So hopefully now in your hand, you have an energy profile for current job situation. And hopefully this exercise allows you to reflect on where you fall in each of these 5 areas. If you have a question, is not clear about something, just write it down for now. And having the snapshot of where you are is the first step in the career troubleshooting process. If it's all good, then congrats, you can log off the webinar now, you're all set. But if not, then your career picture is suboptimal in one or more of these 5 dimensions. So the next portion of the talk will go over 3 strategies for improving your career. Now, strategy number 1 is to stay and improve the job where you are. Don't go anywhere, just grind your teeth and make it better. All right, so you can improve it in each of the 5 dimensions we just covered, starting with a dimension that's particularly low. So in this example here, pictured, that will be your interest. So this strategy is relevant when you're temporarily stuck in a suboptimal career situation, either by choice or by force circumstances outside your control. It's also relevant because even when you're at your dream job, you may have stretches of time when one of these dimensions go out of whack, right? So with this picture in mind, you can catch it quickly and take action before things gets worse. But before we talk about how to improve your interest, I have another question for you first. So if I ask you, would you be interested in taking some simple block shapes and try to figure out how to pack them in as tightly as you can? How interested would you say you're in this task? You probably say, no, thank you, right? Only 3-year-olds find that interesting. Yet, you'll probably enjoy playing Tetris, right? Even though the topic of Tetris, packing shapes, sounds really boring, the process of playing Tetris is really engaging. It's, got a very tight feedback loop, and in fact, it can be downright addictive. So one way you can improve your interest level at work is to find ways to gamify your daily tasks. Ask yourself, can I make the feedback loop tighter? Can I turn it into a competition? And now the second way to improve your interest level is take on a new project that you're more interested in. This sounds simple-minded, but you know what? You do have a chance to oftentimes to take on new projects. The third is to find creative ways to offload the parts you're not interested in. And, perhaps you can negotiate for more admin support, for example, if you're find yourself doing too much routine work. The next strategy is so that's the stay where you are and, make it better. The next one is supplement your current job with something that will result in a better overall life energy profile. And here's what I mean by that. So, take the same example from earlier. If your job is low on interest, perhaps you can supplement that job with, say, a hobby so that the amount of interest in your overall life is higher. You're not limited to doing everything within the confine of your job. You can use your life to supplement, how you feel and make the bars go the way you like to go. So here's a personal example. In the needs category, my need for adventure is not fully satisfied by my career as a coach. So a while back, I noticed that, and I start, troubleshooting it. So I created this project I call Care Dares, where friends will send me dares to do, and in exchange, they'll have to donate money to the charity of my choosing. So far, I've crashed a bar mitzvah, I performed stand-up comedy at the Improv Boston, I worked at a Jiffy Lube for a day, and another thing I did is I walked from Boston to Northampton about 100 miles without bringing any money and food. I had to panhandle and sleep in the woods. I've never done anything like that before, so it was quite something. And doing those dares, believe it or not, satisfied my need for adventure. So at this point, you may say, it's all well and good to use this supplement strategy, right? But what if I don't have time outside work to do any of this thing? What do I do? It definitely makes things tougher. Personally, I consider the work hard, play hard mentality a piece of very dangerous propaganda. It's all well and good when you're 100% happy at your job, but as soon as things go out of whack, either in your job or your personal life, you have little room to maneuver. I don't like the term work-life balance. I tend to think of things in terms of maximizing the energy profile of your overall life. So how does those 5 bars look for your overall life, not just for your career? But if your work takes up all your time, then you're much more constrained when it comes to making improvement to your overall life energy profile. Now, with that said, you can probably squeeze out some time by reading Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek. After you make some time, then you can consider what you can add to supplement things to make your profile better. I hope that's making sense. So finally, we'll talk about the third and final career improvement strategy, and that's leaving the job, go somewhere else. It's the most drastic of the 3, and it still leaves open the question that we had asked earlier of how big of a change to make, whether it's going to a new job or new industry, new career, or join the circus. So this next 3 slides hold the key to the answer. And if you're currently a student, you're trying to make a career choice, this is super important here. So what you do is, for each of the options you're considering, whether it's a different job or a new career or the circus, you want to estimate its energy profile to the best of your ability. For example, here's the energy profile for joining the circus. It's one of the options you consider, say, if you're quitting your job as a software QA guy. and notice the bars here are not as solid. They're tentative, and that signifies the fact they're estimates. Take competence, for example. You think you would make a really good acrobat because you were a competitive gymnast back in school, but you're not sure because maybe being a circus performer involves being like a great showman, right, that you can handle. And there are a lot of unknowns. Same thing with interest. Right now, you estimate it to be very high, but you're not sure if it's going to last. Now, at this point, you have your work cut out for you. You want to do everything in your power to make more solid estimates. You can read biographies of famous circus performers or even do an information interview, right? So now, a common mistake when someone does an information interview, students in particular, is they ask vague questions like, what's your advice for me, right? So now with this energy profile in hand, you can become a detective and prepare very targeted questions that help you make better estimates in each of these 5 dimensions for the particular job you have in question, that this person you're interviewing have experience with. It's a tentative energy profile that can guide you in terms of determine also what experiments to do, not just what questions to ask. And you may need to conduct some experiments to make better estimates. Sometimes you won't know how you feel until you try it out, right? So this is in terms of internship, you may shadow with someone or take a side project. So the second step, after you're satisfied with your estimate, the second step is to improve your profile. Now, this goes back to strategies 1 and 2, which is covered. So, for example, if in this energy profile for drilling the surface that we just introduced earlier, your need for financial security is now met in the surface scenario. Now, there's steps you can take to improve it. So we can learn a little bit from Arnold Schwarzenegger here. Now, he went into acting knowing that it's a tough industry, it's hard to make a living as an unknown, right? Most actors don't get to be a star. So he supplemented his career, remember supplements. So he supplemented his acting career, and he was a bricklayer, believe it or not, building fireplaces for rich people in Hollywood. And then he invested those earnings into real estate, and he was already a millionaire by the time he caught his big break in acting. So by now, we've improved each of your options. The third step is to pick the best option. And finally, the fourth step, if this option is better than what you got right now, you can take off and go to the new thing. It's simple as that. Your goal is, in making a job transition, is to go from your current suboptimal energy profile to another profile that's better than what you have along every single dimension, along every one of these 5 dimensions. So if you do this, then you never have a tough decision to make because where you're going is always strictly better than where you're now. Well, here you may ask, well, what if I really want to do something that doesn't have a good energy profile, right? So first, I advise you, don't do it. At least don't jump into it too quickly. You have more options than you think. You know, with some creativity, you might be able to find something that gives you what you want and have a better overall profile. And if you do that, then apply the first 2 strategies. But you know what, if you can do that, then you want to apply the first 2 strategies that we covered to improve the profile. Then when all of that fails and you feel like you have to commit to a suboptimal situation for a while just because, you know, maybe it gets you the money you want for the long-term security or freedom, for example, as in the extreme early retirement community, make sure you don't do it for too long. And here's rule of thumb that I call Ann's rule for sucking it up. So this chart details the maximal advisable number of years you allow yourself to endure a bad job for the sake of future gain. You know, this is like knowingly choosing to do something that's not optimal just because you want something else in the future, right? So it's age dependent. You want to think long and hard before you commit yourself to something beyond these limits. So now we wrapped up the career troubleshooting process, and we'll go back and revisit the career energy framework and do a deeper dive on purpose and needs. And these are 2 really important dimensions that tend to get ignored by most people. So first, purpose. Now, I think some of you might be a little skeptical at this point, right? Maybe you've achieved a lot of success already without it. So I'm not going to make a pro-social argument here. Instead, I'm going to show you how purpose can be a huge competitive advantage. Purpose, you know, for me, it acts like a trampoline. It catches you on the downside. So when things aren't going well, for example, your startup is flailing and the work required to make it better is unpleasant. You have to knock on doors and raise more money. Your sense of purpose at this point can help you find the energy and press on. And there are plenty of evidence in the social science literature that show that having a sense of purpose for a task can make you more persistent in the face of adversity. And most of us will agree that, you know, persistence is a pretty key ingredient in many successful endeavors. So secondly, purpose acts like an amplifier as well. Just like a trampoline, you know, trampoline sends you higher than you can jump on your own. So purpose gives you the ability to scale up your project. When you're purposeful, you're better able to infect others with a sense of purpose and also get big projects off the ground. And this is key if you're in a leadership position. Now, in summary, purpose has this really cool property of giving us, like really helping us at the extremes, right? It helps propel us to greater success and also cushion our fall when things are going well. So hopefully you're now convinced that this purpose thing, is at least worth thinking about. So now you may ask, well, how do I figure out my purpose then? So we'll start with something much less ambitious. One approach is to improve your sense of purpose, not finding the purpose, but just to improve your purpose overall. And you can do that at work by simply asking questions, how can I help and contribute? When we go beyond ourselves and try to help others, we often get an energy boost and in turn make ourselves happier. So here's the key part. When you're doing the helping, look for win-win situations. Say a coworker is struggling to get a pivot table working in Excel, right? And you've always wanted to learn about pivot tables, then you may want to help him out. But if you have no interest in pivot table, maybe ignore that one and help some other time, right? So if you're feeling skeptical and worried at this point of being stuck as the sucker, right, in the company that everyone take advantage of because you're like the nice little helper, that's totally understandable. I suggest you read the book Give and Take by Adam Grant. In his book, he shows how givers can get ahead. And so next, I will try to tackle the more ambitious question of finding your specific purpose. And I'll share the example. This is my purpose. So my purpose in life, is to experience connections. Internally, I feel a sense of excitement when I connect two ideas together in my head. And externally, I love connecting with other people on a deep level. I also like to connect with nature, etc. It can be captured by this picture of two kids holding hands and running together. They're excited and connected. And this is why I'm really committed to living life this way. And it's also the specific way I want to help the world. Some people want to devote their life to helping the hungry, some fight for justice. I help people run free. And so to uncover your purpose, you may want to ask yourself, what do I feel for, right? So oftentimes this comes from pain you experience that you love to help people avoid. In my case, I moved here from China when I was 13. I didn't speak any English at the time, so I was like the foreign nerd that kids made fun of. I feel really stuck and alone on a daily basis. And this is why I really want to help people who feel stuck, because I can still relate to that sense of isolation and frustration and hopelessness. And, and it's a reason I love being a coach, because I get to help people run free in their career, whatever their version of running free might be. And what's more, I get to connect with my clients on a deep level when I'm coaching them. So, both of these things together make coaching deeply satisfying for me because I have this picture as my purpose. Now you may ask, how do you find your purpose, aside from examining your own pain? Now I'll share another method with you today here. It's a more methodical approach featured in the book Grit by Angela Duckworth, which I highly recommend, by the way. The first step is to make a list of your current goals, and here are some of my current goals. Write a book, do a TED Talk, find a web developer, etc. Now, on the second step is for each of these low-level goals, you want to ask yourself the question, what am I hoping to get by doing this, right? And then you cluster the ones that fall under the same mid-level goal together. So here, finding a web developer and organizing a robo coaching conference both contribute to the goal of developing an automated coach. Now, my other two mid-level goals are expand my one-on-one coaching and also deepen friendships and go on more adventures. And so then I repeat the procedure and ask, what am I hoping to get from each of these three mid-level goals? And as it turns out, they all contribute to my ultimate goal of experiencing connections and helping others do the same, like running free like that last picture. So what good does this goal hierarchy do for you, right, you may ask? Now, remember the quit or stick decision that we talked about, in the very beginning? This framework gives us a shortcut for making that decision. It allows us to quit with flourish and stick with persistence. Essentially, it allows you to quit without being a quitter. And let me explain with an example. Well, say your friend is on the paleo diet, right? And next month you meet up with him, he goes on low carb. And then the month after you meet up with him, he's on, he's doing vegetarian diet now. So from your perspective, he looked like a quitter with no persistence. But internally, from his perspective, all these diets have the higher level goal of achieving optimal health. He's just experimenting with what works for him. While he's 100% committed to the higher level goal, he's free to ditch any of the diets as soon as he realizes it doesn't work for him, because they're just means to an end. Coming back to this goal graph, for me, I'm 100% committed to my top level goal of experiencing connection. Now, once I had quit a job I had, the one right after the 2 months I got laid off, the next job I quit after 5 months. People were saying, you're going to ruin your career. But I knew it was the right thing to do because I was experiencing no connections and was not going to happen anytime soon, right? This graph brought me clarity to what I should be doing. So having this goal hierarchy also makes us more resilient. For example, if for some reason I can no longer be a career coach, I'll be pretty upset at first, but at the end of the day, there are other ways besides my top level goal here of experiencing connections. Maybe I can become a professional matchmaker or a marriage counselor, right, who also help people experiencing connections. And when it comes to the quit or stick decision, in general, the rule of thumb is the higher up a goal is located on your goal hierarchy, the more committed you want to be to it. And for the goal that sits on top of everything, you want to be 100% committed because that's the core of who you are. Beyond that, you can be flexible about how you get there. Now, the one thing to note about the goal hierarchy is that I have one goal that sits on the top of everything. You could potentially have up to two. You can have one for your career and one for everything else. That's okay too. Sometimes they don't integrate as well, and that's fine. So now remember the question we had a lot earlier about passion schmassion, what's the role of passion? Well, I believe passion is a combination of interest, purpose, and competence, constrained by, our personality fit with the thing we're doing, and also constrained by our needs. Because, if we go too long without having our needs met, our passion can really suffer and get drained out. Remember the burnout social worker, that started out really passionate, but then start feeling burnout later? So that's what I mean by personality and needs being a constraint. And also, I just want to share, I don't like the phrase pursue your passion, because passion is not a fully formed thing. It's not something to be found somewhere. For example, let me show you what I mean by that. If your purpose in life ultimately becomes helping autistic children because you have a niece that's autistic, right, and you saw her struggles and really want to help her out. Now, before your niece was born, your sense of purpose hasn't been triggered yet, so looking for it wouldn't have gotten you anywhere. And this piece of advice is particularly relevant if you're a student currently or you're early on in your career. Instead of obsessing about finding your passion, what you really want to be doing is gaining competence, because when you're competent, you can negotiate much better and have huge leverage to satisfy your needs and, do interesting projects, right? So gain competence, and then nurture your interest. Notice, what are you interested in? Really take notice and follow that and experiment with things. And then improve your purpose by asking how you can help. And all the time, launching projects and having life experiences. This approach maximizes your chance of living passionately in the short run and in the long run. Phew, so that's all I'm going to say about purpose for now. And, finally, we'll take a look at needs. Needs is another area that's not really well understood and ignored by most people. So you can see here, needs is a liability. We tend not to appreciate what we have until we've lost it. And so when a need is satisfied, it doesn't generate much positive energy. But when it's violated, however, we become miserable. I want to share with you the story of Debbie Millman, one of the most influential graphic designers around today. So when she was a little girl, she drew a picture of her future. It was a picture of her living in Manhattan. Career-wise, after college, she moved to New York City and wanted to become an artist. But making a living, making a rent became a struggle, so she decided to get a job in graphic design and advertising instead. For quite a while, she doubted her choice because she thought maybe she sold out, right? But much later, after she achieved all the fame and fortune, as she reflected back in her life, what she really cared about is living in Manhattan. That was the thing she wanted, and she did whatever it took, whether it's living in tiny, cramped apartments or giving up being a painter. And it would really have been useful if she embraced that early on, it saved her a lot of angst. The fact that her need to live in Manhattan really drives the rest of her life and career. It's a very strong driving force. And it's great to recognize that consciously. What this story illustrates is that we often don't understand or acknowledge our needs, and especially if something that we feel is trivial or embarrassing, right? And the big improvement we can make in the needs dimension is by first uncovering our needs and then embracing them. So when it comes to itemizing and organizing our needs, Maslow's hierarchy can make for a good starting point. It ranges from basic physiological needs such as food and sleep to top-level needs such as self-actualization. It provides a good reference for our needs in general as a person. But when it comes to our career-specific needs, here are some to consider. Just take the need for autonomy, for example. You probably appreciate it if you've ever had a micromanaging boss in the past. So next, here's a common pitfall people fall into regarding needs. We have a bunch of needs. For example, look at the graph on the left. So we have sleep, we have having a good lunch every day, we have ventures, nice car, big house, that's what the needs are. And the y-axis denotes on the scale of 1 to 10 how well these needs are being satisfied. By the way, this is not a like energy profile graph. I know there are 5 things here, so it's a little confusing. So this is not that. This is how well your needs are satisfied. So now, most people have a chart that look like, the one on the left, right? They're sort of all kind of half-assed. But what you want is what's on the right, and learn from the Romans. So rather than being dissatisfied all around, what we want to do is to satisfy the needs that are really intrinsic and core to us. In this example, they could be sleep, having a good lunch every day, and adventure. Then for the needs that are more extrinsic, in this case, for this person is nice car and big house, we can get rid of them as needs altogether. We can go carless and share an apartment with housemates. Everyone's preference is different. The point is that we want to pick out the few important ones and really go all out. I know this sounds simple, but in reality, it's really hard for us to implement because we have a lot of strong limiting beliefs. Sometimes we deny we have needs because we don't want to look weak. We want to seem tough. I'm sure you've boasted about how little sleep you got while making a deadline in the past, right? Another common limiting belief is that we don't want to seem selfish to others, right? Going around satisfying our first world needs because, God forbid, there are starving kids in Africa. If this is the case for you, donate to charity and satisfy your own needs, because otherwise you'll be depriving yourself and the world for no good reason. So a personal example here to illustrate. Last month, I did something pretty drastic to satisfy my need for sleep. I get really bad spring allergies, and my nose was all stuffed up. I couldn't breathe. And after tossing and turning for hours one night, I just got up and checked out pollen.com. It turned out San Diego and Miami had no oak tree pollen, so I booked myself on the cheap flight to San Diego from Boston the next day and spent 11 days there. I stayed in the youth hostel to keep the cost down because I don't want to be extravagant. I worked remotely to get a lot of work done. I actually prepared this talk there, and did my coaching calls and got to see San Diego. And I ended up rooming with 2 psychiatrists from South America at the youth hostel. they were in town for a conference, and we had a blast together. So having flexibility to get up and go like that was no accident, though. You know, I had carefully designed my life that way because I know you'll make me happy. And, you know, I love to see more people going out of their way in things that really matter to them. You know, someone that lives in a tent but has a personal assistant, or someone eats out at a fancy restaurant and then they hop on their bike to go home, right? So now finally, I want to summarize the troubleshooting process here that we went over and talked about. So first, you sketch out your current energy profile, and we did that earlier. If you can email that picture to me, I'd love to see what everyone came up with. And also because what I have here is a work in progress, I'd love to hear your thoughts on improving this framework. And here's my email. It ends in .io, not .com. Just take a note of that. Now, the second step is to know yourself better along each of these 5 dimensions. You can take, you know, a test for interest or a personality test. You can construct your goal hierarchy to find your purpose and start paying attention to your needs, for example. The third step is what we went over to improve your energy profile with each of the strategy we talked about. You know, improve your job in place, supplement with something else, or leave altogether. So I want to leave you with a parting gift, and it's a little trick that you can use to give yourself a big energy boost no matter who you are and where you are, and no matter how desperate your situation is at the time. You know, remember we went over the needs section, right? And I said needs doesn't bring any positive energy because we just take things for granted. Well, you know, there are ways to counteract that natural tendency as shown here, right? So you can practice stoicism periodically and deprive yourself of something you need so you can appreciate even more. If you've ever gone camping before, you know what I mean, right? When you come back, you just can't, you know, you love the electricity, the hot shower, and your high-speed internet. Now, secondly, if you can start a gratefulness practice on a daily basis, appreciate and think about the things you do have and really be thankful about them, that can also impact your energy on a day-to-day basis. And it will continually to generate positive energy just seemingly out of nowhere. And this method is completely under your control and no matter what situation you are in. I'm grateful for the opportunity to connect with you today, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was a lot of information, a lot of good content there. But I want to dive into some questions because we certainly have a lot of good ones. MIT alumni certainly have asked a lot of great questions. Hopefully we can get to some of them now. Sure. I guess one of, and here's a great typical MIT question. Someone wants to ask you, and a few of other people did as well, what's the sort of quantitative information to support the 5-factor analysis, and how did you choose those 5 factors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I sort of said earlier that it's kind of a hand-wavy thing. I think it's a combination of research. So there's a meta study. If you're interested, you can send me an email and I'll send it to you on interest, for example, and how interest impact our performance and our happiness. And it showed that it's a really important one. And performance impact our happiness, so that's another one. And I think in Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, she also cited how purpose impacts our happiness. So there's some good research there.
Definitely. Lots of good positive psychology, for sure.
Yes, a lot of psychology literature. And then it's just my personal experience and also my experience coaching people. It's just a really simplified framework, because at the end of the day, you can lump everything into the needs category, right? So I think one person asked me before, well, isn't everything just a need? And I completely agree, but when you think in that way, it doesn't, it doesn't add enough clarity. So this is more of a shortcut, I would say. It's nothing set in stone. It's just a shortcut, so that will allow you to quickly take a look, think about, okay, what are my 5 things? Are they been met? Here we go, right? and help you make decisions faster. So I would say it's more of a heuristic than, you know, a theory or a true algorithm.
And do you find that some of the factors weigh more heavily than others, such as interest, or do you find that they hold equal weight?
You know, I've actually tweaked this over the last 6 months. You know, the relative height of competence versus interest, I'm still debating, because competence can, when you're competent at something, you can get a big energy boost, right? So partly because, you know, it might bring you like more money and praise and everything, but those things actually goes into your needs, your other needs category, your need for recognition. So competence, you know, some might say that actually bring a bigger boost than interest. And I think another thing is that person-specific, you need to calibrate with yourself, right? Think about, like, you know, how stressed do I get in the past when I can't do something versus how bored I am. So you have a personal calibrated. What I have shown here is just sort of like a general average. So you may want to first construct your personal calibration of your typical ranges, right, that you have. And then you want to ask yourself, okay, so this is my typical range. Well, what is this job, right? Well, what is today? Well, what's this project making me feel? And then do a specific one, and that will be a little bit more, quote unquote, accurate.
Definitely. So when you're thinking, I guess, about competence in general, do you have recommendations? I'm sure you find this working with a lot of high achievers and a lot of people coming out of perhaps a place like MIT. How do you have recommendations for dealing with imposter syndrome and for individuals and that disconnect between, or the objectiveness of I am competent or I'm feeling I'm not competent? And how do you break that down?
That's a really good question. So first, the imposter syndrome part. And so I think part of having the imposter syndrome might be what you're using as your motivation. You might be only using your competence as a driver, right, and noticing you're incompetent at something. So a typical thing is you scan around for, like, oh, what am I bad at, right? And then I'm going to improve that thing so I don't feel bad or incompetent. And that's your driver. And if that's your energy driver, then you never want to be without it, because in the back of your mind, there's some doubt that if I ever feel like I'm good enough, then I'm never going to improve anymore, right? I'm going to sit there, be complacent. I'm not going to achieve anymore and just stop being successful. And that's the underlying doubt for some of us, you know, who are high achievers. That's, you know, really, we're just psyching ourselves out over and over again. You know, we're keep telling us, like, oh, you're bad, you're bad, you need to get better. That's because we're overly focusing on that fear-driven motivation. So this energy profile is really relevant because you want to start uncovering your other positive energy drivers, not just that competence negative driver. You want to think about your purpose, right? You know, what gives you that strong sense of purpose? You want to think about your inherent interest. So if you're someone that really, or you know, was a high achiever from a very early age, sometimes you just got tracked into it, and you got tracked into something you're good at, you may or may not exhibit, like, super high interest. You know, like, I sort of got into, you know, math and MIT because when I moved here from China, like, my English was, I couldn't speak the language, so I forgot, you know, I didn't want to do anything humanity related. So I just got into the math track. And then next thing you know, I'm doing more math and computer science stuff, and it's really hard to get off that track because I already, you know, achieved something, right, in that side. So you want to take a step back and think about, you know, what are my inherent interests? So there are interest inventories you can take that'll help you figure that out. And, you know, I go through, like, tons of exercise with clients as well to help do that. So that's another thing you want to do, right? So that, I think, you know, just trying to figure out other motivations rather than just drive on that, like, I'm not smart, right, and then forcing yourself to get better. That's the answer to the first part of your question. The second part of your question is there's a difference between feeling incompetent and actually being incompetent, and it's not a hard one to figure out. All you have to do is go ask people with much higher level view than you, and then ask them, am I incompetent or am I just feeling like that, right? So if you're a computer programmer, go find some CTOs that will, you know, objectively evaluate you rather than just you sitting there feeling incompetent all day. This is, you know, it's very common actually to feel this way.
Great. So I guess that sort of goes into the next question, where the energy profile sort of starts off with the assumption that an individual knows themselves very well, or knowing what they really want to do or what they really want. So if we were to sort of start the process back a little further in self-assessment, where does one start if they're lost or if they're not sure which direction to take or where to start, and what sort of resources or recommendations do you have for individuals who may not be ready for looking at that energy profile yet?
Yeah, I totally get that. So I think whether or not you're lost or not, you can start building your knowledge around those 5 dimensions. You may not have like these bars, but you can figure out, you know, what are my interests, you know, what's my personality, and, you know, figure out each of these things, like what are my needs, right? When do I feel grumpy if I don't get something? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, you may actually want to look at the talk I did last year, you know, through the Alumni Association. I believe it's online. In that talk, I cover more of, like, if you're just kind of lost or starting from scratch, what do you do? Because what we're doing here today is that you got, you know, I detailed, you're comparing energy profile, right, of a couple jobs or a couple options that you're trying to optimize them and then compare and pick one. What if you have, you know, a million energy profile, right? They're just all the jobs out there in the world. You don't know where to even start. Now, you can't just pick 3. You got to go through a little bit more methodical process, you know, if you want to do it, quote unquote, right. So you want to go look at that last talk. And another thing is that this talk is just sort of like a really squeezed down version. So if you have that question and also more, I'm actually teaching an online class the class starts in August, but the registration starts right now. And actually, if you sign up by next Tuesday, the 20th, you get like early bird discount. So you can check that out at Passion Analytics and go to click on courses. So in that course, I'll talk about, you know, things like that we didn't cover, like, you know, how do you build opportunity feeds so that opportunities come to you, right, rather than you know, looking at 3 limited opportunities and going like, nah, that one's like better in this, but worse in this, and that one is like, you know, none of them is like a strictly better than what you have, because that's the place you want to be in, right? You want to be going to the next option that's just strictly better than where you're now, and that's really the sort of thing that I do. Like, as a career coach, I'm working with my clients and strategizing with them and building these things and uncovering their edge, you know, and what they can do, so that we construct the next options really actively, like building their thought leadership and, you know, building things up so that they start having these cool opportunities flowing to them, right? And that's what you want to do. You don't want to be waiting till you're in really, really deep trouble to see a career coach, because then, you know, our way to maneuver are a lot more limited and constrained. You know, what I love to see is to help people who are like high performers do even better in their life, right? Rather than, you know, only talking to people who are like extremely stuck and can't, you know, we can still actually, you know, do a lot of things, but as you can see, things get more constrained when you are, when you have, say, you know, a 60-hour job, right? And things just, it limits your action set when you're not in that more aggressive, active side of things.
Sure, definitely. So I have one last question that I want to ask, which is, so the factors relate to the individual, himself or herself. What about the work environment and the relations with colleagues, and especially with someone's boss, which can be something that's very draining on career energy if it's bad. So can you talk a little bit about strategies for that and how that might fit into someone's energy profile, and that's not something that's really talking about the 5 factors, because that's really thinking about yourself, but what about the sort of the externals?
So actually, I will put that into the need category. So if you look at, I don't know where this slide is, what your needs are, right? So you want to look at work conditions. Some of them are like short commute, great lunch, and then could be sense of fairness and what kind of coworker and boss you have, you know, relatedness, good relationships at work. So that's where I categorize them. And so I think it's a really common reason why people leave their job is because they have a bad boss. And I think it's really hard to say in general what to do because, you know, you have to look at the individual situation. But I would say one piece of advice I would give in general is that you want to, I know it's really hard, but to the extent that your boss doesn't constrain your ability to work on projects, right? If he's just annoying and not respectful, try to gain as much competence as you can and make yourself indispensable to the company. Because if you get that, then you can negotiate with that boss. You can talk with that boss and say, look, you know, you can't be doing this, or I'm now coming in on Sunday, right? Because a lot of times what really happens is that we need to take a little more responsibility, because what's happening is that oftentimes we're just too afraid to negotiate with the boss. You know, the boss says something, you know, we just do it, right? And gaining competence and gaining that confidence will let us be more forceful in our negotiation. Having been in, you know, inside a company in HR for many years, I know as a fact that employees have more power than they realize, because it's really hard to recruit a competent employee. You know, sometimes boss will bend over backwards, right, just to keep a person happy. And even if they're not happy with you, they're not going to fire you anytime soon unless your company is tanking. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay. Well, Anne, thank you so much. For those of you who are interested in slides, please reach out to Anne directly, and she will email the slides to you. Her email address, again, is ann@passionanalytics.io. Just remember the .io part, and she will send the slides to you. We will be sending out surveys after the presentation today. Those are always helpful for us in bringing more topics to you all. So if you could fill those out, we would certainly appreciate it. And thank you, as always, for being a return speaker and for bringing such great knowledge to the program. And everyone, have a great afternoon. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.